Before I introduce our special guest tonight and then, pass it on to the panel, I'd like to acknowledge our faculty, the faculty members, some who have retired but have come back tonight to be with us. We have a number of faculty members that are here. Faculty members, please, stand up, please, and, show yourselves, right? These are our faculty members. So we've got a number of faculty members, and I'm sure the students are, delighted to touch base with, our faculty members. Now, I'd also like to recognize we have our Vice President for Academic Affairs. She's here. She's waving over there, right? And Barbara Carlin. There we go. We have my Dean, Paul Fouts, right? There. Do we have any? I saw Tasia Nivi. Is he here? Still here? Well, these are the people who financed our party, right, tonight. So, we gotta recognize, them. Thank you. Now, the biggest financer of the party, of course, comes from the top. I mean, these are the vice presidents and the dean. And I'm about to introduce to you the newest member of our GGU family, the 7th president of Golden Gate University, David J. Fike, who will give us some welcoming remarks. Let's welcome him.
Well, thank you, Jay. I'm really pleased to be here and be able to welcome you, and I mean that sincerely. This is coming home for me. I've been in the Midwest in Detroit for the last 10 years, but I grew up in the East Bay, graduate of Berkeley High School, and my father is an alum of this college as well. And he got his law degree here and spent his career doing public defender and public interest law in Oakland for the last 40 years before he retired. But I mean sincerely that it's a pleasure to be here to give these welcoming remarks, and that I'm thrilled to be serving this institution, first because I feel blessed to be able to be in education. Education is something that is increasingly being thought of in this country as a private good, something that if you are beneficial enough to get your degree, then you get the benefits from it, and that's a good thing. But in reality, education is a public good, not only because each of us that benefit from getting our degree and advance in our career benefit personally, but it's a public good in the sense that the more people we can educate and the more skills and talent that we can bring into the community, it benefits all of us, not just the individual that earns that degree. And so I'm thrilled to be able to be blessed to work in education, and I'm thrilled to be able to be leading an institution like Golden Gate who believes that so greatly. It comes clear to me as I look at the work that the law school is doing in their clinics, the Women's Employment Clinic, the Environmental Clinic. They're very concerned about what's happening to our community and to the broader public. And of course, this program epitomizes that ethos. And so because I feel so proud to be part of Golden Gate, precisely because it cares so deeply about the service that it's been providing to the institution for over 100 years, when Jay reached out to me and invited me to come and give welcoming remarks, I was thrilled to do so, because you all, as graduates of the MPA program, epitomize those ethos. You do the business of the public. You do it in public agencies. Many of you may be doing it in the nonprofit sector, because quite often graduates in this program do their work in community, taking those skills into a variety of different venues. And a good example of that is the next person I wanted to introduce briefly. She's not going to give a speech, but a fellow MPA, and my wife, Sylvia Rosales Fike, was able to join us. Sylvia has dedicated her life to starting and developing nonprofits that serve some of the most vulnerable people in our communities. And so for all of those reasons, Sylvia and I were thrilled to be able to come and be a part of the opening. And unfortunately, we have another event that we need to get to, so we won't be able to stay. But Jay, thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to getting to know this program and all of you a lot better. Thank you.
Wow, I didn't know we have an MPA ally right in the president's house. Very good. Very good. Now I'm very pleased. So some housekeeping before I pass it on to the, a little bit about the history of the program before, I pass it out to the panel very quickly. We really started out as a program in 1963, right? We had a president, President Otto Butz, who was a political scientist, and he said, we need, we need a program that deals with government. We need to improve government. We need to make it more efficient. We need to make it more effective. And that began, really the MPA program at Golden Gate University. Our first graduates graduated in 2 years after, in 1965. Since then, we've been offering classes. We peaked at one point to all over the country. Every military base had an educational center, and there was Golden Gate University. So we have graduates who have gone on to become, chiefs of staffs, people who work in Bethesda, in Washington, D.C., to people who worked in state legislatures, different states in the union, and of course, internationally. So the program has gone on, and right now we're opening a new law enforcement concentration. It's actually a return of law enforcement concentration into the EMPA program. And it's very timely. As you can see, we have a panel. You watch CNN, you watch BBC, you watch Al Jazeera. It's in the news. So that's how we are. As a real-world university, we have to respond to these real-world needs, in real time, as you know. So it's very important for us to be here, and hopefully we can continue the legacy for another 50 years, for another 100 years, for maybe 200 years more. Okay, so just housekeeping, you have cards on your, that's, if you have questions, please write them down on the cards, and Dr. Mick and I will be gathering them and handing them over to the moderator that we have tonight. Also, on your chair is a make a statement. If you are doing social media, if you're, tweeting, you can use this, and this is, for our social media advisory to you. All right, so now I will hand it over to our distinguished panel. The panel is going to be moderated by Dr. Ruth Astel, a graduate of GGU, a GGU alumni, who is, a judge, an administrative law judge for the state of California in Oakland, right? So let's give a hand to Ruth. To the far left is the assistant police chief of Oakland. He was, he joined the program he graduated from the program 2005. Right, and that's Paul Figueroa. To his right is, I'm used to call him Captain Jackson, because when he was a student, at the program, he was at the Alameda County Sheriff's Office. But he has since retired from the ACSO after 24 years of service, and is now the head of security of AC Transit. So, Kerry Jackson. What I call a batchmate of Paul, because they were from the batch of 2005, is, to the right of Kerry Jackson. And he works for the San Francisco DA's office. Carlos Sanchez has been there in the white-collar crime, unit, heading the white-collar crime investigations unit. He was with Visa Security, Visa card holders. He was the one responsible for securing your cards at one point globally. And he's now, also he went back to the San Francisco DA's office. So, Lieutenant Carlos Sanchez. So without further ado, from Katrina to Baltimore, Ruth.
Thank you. Let's see if I can get up here.
Yeah.
A little short.
Got it?
There we go. Well, I'm honored to be the moderator of the panel. The panel has met shortly over the telephone and had some discussions. And so we've got some general questions that we're going to ask the panel, and each of them are going to have an opportunity to answer the questions. And then we're opening the floor to questions from the audience. If you write down your questions, I believe Kendra is going to go around and collect them, and then we'll present the questions to the panel. So our first question that we decided to talk about is, what is the most challenging issue facing public administration today, and how ready are you or are we to meet that challenge? And I'm going to start with Paul Figueroa here on my right.
Great.
And ask him to address the issue.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. I was with our police academy today, and when I said good morning, everyone, there was this rapid good morning, sir. But so I just didn't get that in the academic. I did. You've had wine. So the academic culture is different than the culture in a police academy. But no, I'm just kidding. Thank you so much, Dr. J, as I called him, for letting me be here tonight. And just so many people. Tim, we worked together in Oakland, and I had many a frantic phone call to our employee relations department, which Tim ran for a long time. What do I do? This happened. What do I do? So it was nice to have somebody there that we could really rely on for good advice. And Brenda Roberts, our city auditor, is here. She's in the back there. Thank you so much for coming. And so I'm nervous because many a Tim sitting right in front of me. But no, I just thank you. Thank you so much. And to my colleagues that I've known for some time. You know, it's hard for me to speak about anything else than what we've seen happen in Ferguson and what we've seen play out across the country in terms of policing and the call for accountability and for something new in law enforcement. And it's something that I've had a chance to do some writing about and thinking about, and it's tough. And when you look at Oakland, you know, obviously Oakland has some crime challenges, right? Or usually in the top 10. And I'm a lifelong Oaklander, so I've got a lot of pride in Oakland, still in Oakland. I guess that's redundant, right, Tim? I guess lifelong Oaklander, still in there. So it's been painful over the years, especially seen as a city that has some economic challenges, is challenged with crime, and has so many pressures and needs on government that it really strains the relationship and puts heavy expectations on particularly law enforcement that I work in. We look at crime in Oakland from a public administration perspective. It is a major factor in economic development in our communities. So it is the topic when business leaders come to Oakland to talk about what they're going to do and what businesses they want to move in, what's the crime in the area, and it's the topic. It's the overwhelming topic. You know, are we going to be safe if I have employees here? And Oakland is getting better. You know, we typically, as you look over a 44-year trend in Oakland, crime spikes when the rest of the country spikes, and it actually usually spikes a little bit higher. And then when crime drops across the country, we don't drop as low. So the statistician in me sees that you're always going to have this widening gap, right? Because we're always higher and never as low. And that's really been Oakland's story when you look at crime. And then there's the other Oakland. That's the Oakland that I grew up in, right? And the rich. The reason I couldn't move out of the Fruitvale district is I couldn't leave all the great food. And those that have eaten in the Fruitvale district know exactly what I'm talking about, right? So, so there's all these wonderful things, and so the role of public administration is really to try to lift those things that are up that are great, and to deal with the things that have been not so great in the city. And as we look at policing in Oakland over the years. You know, Philadelphia will argue with this sometimes, but the Black Panthers did start in Oakland, but they started for a reason, right? And you can look at the Oakland Police Department for years, and one of the things that we're doing at the Oakland Police Department that's real key is we're owning the past. We don't like it, but we recognize that we came from a very tough spot, especially with communities of color, more African American in Oakland, but certainly there have been issues with immigration and Latinos growing up. But Oakland's history with the police department and community has been jagged, to say the least. It's been tough. There's been some real rough patches. And so one of the challenges is really coming around it and owning that and say, but we can do something different. We can do something better. There's a way to move forward that we can all be proud of a police department and hold our heads high. We can all be, I've always been proud to be at the Oakland Police Department, but there have been some meetings where they've talked about OPD and then I've just kept my mouth shut because clearly that wasn't the time to talk about it. And so we own that and we recognize that, but we do want to have a police department that's accountable to our community, that has a great relationship with our community. And so we've done a number of things over the years to do better. I'm not going to give an infomercial for OPD, but our uses of force are down almost 70% across the board. Of course, we still have the high-profile uses of force. Even today, we had an officer attacked as she was finishing a report, and is hospitalized actually as a result of it, and resulted in an officer-involved shooting. We actually went for a stretch of time for 2 years in Oakland without an officer-involved shooting, as that's a change of tactics, training, and a lot of different things. They're going to happen. It can be confrontational at times, but we can also get better at it, and that's a real challenge of public administration, to say how do we get better at what we do? How do we own the past and say what's a way we can move forward and really build a relationship and trust with the community? Because at the end of the day, I had an opportunity to move on in my to achieve a higher degree than a master's, and part of my dissertation was writing about, it was called Building Community Trust: Key Strategies as Perceived by Law Enforcement Leaders. And there is clear evidence, well-researched empirical evidence, to show that the more a community trusts the police, the safer that community is. And that's in economically disadvantaged communities as well. That's not just, it's not, well, the affluent communities, of course they're going to trust the police. They don't have a lot of contact with them. But the research I'm talking about is comparing like demographics, like socioeconomic status, all that. It's very strong literature in the procedural justice, police legitimacy world that show the higher levels of trust of police, the more there's voluntary compliance with the law. And that's really, as we look at the polls across the country, trust is really regaining that trust and building that trust. I say thank God for elected officials. Sorry, Brenda. They're the only ones rated lower in trust than the police in some categories, but not city auditors, of course. But they're very trusted. But we have, and I apologize that came across as a joke, because it's really not. We have a lot of work ahead of us, but the reality is that the research is strong, that we can lower crime by building trust in the police, and you don't have to take as many people to jail, and that the research is clear about that across the country. And so that's really the challenge I see in terms of law enforcement and public administration as a whole. And that goes for government in so many facets across the board. I won't even start to talk about the prison system. That comes later. But we have a long way to go, and building trust is the key moving forward for all of us.
Thank you very much. So we move on to, I always call him Captain Jackson.
It's just fine.
Garrett. Sorry. We're demoting you, right? You're higher than that now.
Well,
go ahead, and
yeah.
we'd like to hear your thoughts
So,
on this.
I would certainly agree with Paul in terms of building community trust. Public administration is already complex, and so how do we get leaders to develop that trust amongst the community? So the community has high expectations on their leaders. Sometimes they're grandiose, and we cannot always fulfill their expectations. But nonetheless, we have to be able to bridge that gap of community trusting leaders in positions of authority. So from my perspective, I'm just going to talk a little bit about my former job as a captain with the Alameda County Sheriff's Office, and my new role as head of security at AC Transit. And by that trust, you have, so I was in charge of transportation for the Sheriff's Office. I'm in charge of transportation for AC Transit. There's a correlation there. For the Sheriff's Department, you're in charge of the care, custody, and control of inmates that you transport to court and everywhere else within the criminal justice system. And conversely, for AC Transit, you're entrusted with the care of the customers and the citizens that ride the buses and of the bus operators that operate them. So if the community doesn't feel safe riding our buses at AC Transit, then I failed them. So my job is to develop that trust between the community and the leadership at AC Transit and make that transparent. So, and the way to do that is have the community work with us. And so we try to address problems before they reach our transit district. So in other words, if there's crime that's happening along the transit routes, we want to address that first. And oftentimes we work well with OPD and the Alameda County Sheriff's Department, my old agency, was our contract police agency for AC Transit. But again, it starts way down at the lower level of allowing the community to feel safe in the services you're providing them. Now, inmates, they don't really have a choice. They're in custody, but we still have to make them feel safe. They're in our custody. They're in our care. So we are responsible for them, just as we are responsible for customers riding our buses on AC Transit. So the bottom line to me is to break down a lot of the bureaucracy in public administration and get to the ground level where the community is involved in what you're doing, because after all, it is their transit agency. They should have input in what we're doing in developing policy. And then we should push that back out and say, these are the services we're trying to provide to you to make you feel safe, to make this one of the better transit agencies around. And so from a public administration point, I would agree 100% with Paul. If you don't have that level of trust and cooperation, not only with the community, but amongst other agencies, then you have a huge road to hoe. But I think it's getting better. I think we understand that the crux of the issue is collaboration between community, civic leaders, and administrators. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you go by Lieutenant Sedge?
You can call me whatever you like, as long as it's nice.
By the way, I was put in the middle to keep these two apart.
That's right. That's right.
I was about to say, I thought we had a 2-minute rule. Thank you for also, thank you, Honorable Asto and Dr. J, who I also referred to, for inviting me here to be here in this panel. I also want to thank my boss who's here, Tom Scheuer, who is in the district attorney's now office, but used to also be the assistant chief of the San Francisco Police Department and a former alumni of this institution. I agree with my distinguished colleagues here. Trust, transparency is definitely on everyone's page, everyone's viewpoint. But I'm going to kind of change the picture a little bit as far as the challenges right now that we're seeing in public administration. And one big thing is that we're seeing is big economic crimes are really affecting all public administrators. And I really sincerely mean that. It's not anymore a local issue, but a real big global issue in public administration. We saw that just about a week and a half ago. IRS recently said, 2013, 334,000 taxpayers' private information was out there for everybody to see and was hacked by hackers or fraudsters, whoever end up invading our privacy. Privacy and economic crimes is a big thing right now affecting public administrators. And 50 years ago, when this institution opened up, if you recall, you used to do paper applications, for some of them that might remember. I was a little too young. But even our taxes now, we're required to do e-filing. E-filing is a requirement. We can no longer do paper filing. And IRS paid out in 2013 $5.6 billion, right, in refunds due to electronic filings. That was fraud. That was straight out fraud. We don't know how many we're going to get hit this next year because of 2014. And intrusion and the hackers with 334,000 people that got hit. And that's what we know of right now. Every 2 seconds, we have our identity stolen. And that's huge. And that's something to think about. My God, every 2 seconds. Everything we're doing now is electronic. We want to trust that we're putting our information out in a public area, public arena, but how do we protect it? How can we protect that type of information? You know, and in the public administration arena, one of the big challenges is who are we recruiting? What kind of people are we actually getting to protect our information? We have a lot of people going to tech. Geez, this is Silicon Valley here, right? We have everybody going down. Are we having those people join public administration agencies? Are we attracting, recruiting qualified people to work in government to help protect our information? And that's a real big challenge that we're all seeing, not only local, state, and federal level, and globally. We have information that's being hacked. And if we can't hire that qualified type people and be able to keep them, we're going to be hurting down the road, and we're not going to be prepared for all this electronic filing. So it's a huge challenge for us. Social media is another challenge. Everything we do, and we talk about trust, is all transparent in social media. What is social media painting of your department or your agency? What is the image that now is being plastered all over social media in seconds? It's quick. You know, before, if something happened in the city of Martinez, where our distinguished councilwoman is here, you wouldn't hear about it. Now, gee, did you see what happened in Martinez? And we could be in Washington, D.C., or we could be in France looking at this news. You know, so it's very instant. What is the image that we are portraying, and how can we protect that image? You know, and again, that's one of the things that we have to continue to work as public administrators, is building that image, protecting our information. We have medical information that we apply every day. We have institutions, educational institutions that are public, that we're loading up our information all the time. We teach online courses. You know, how are we protecting that information? And we really have to be very cognizant of it. You know, and I really feel that might be one of the big challenges right now for our 21st century.
Thank you, panel members. I do also want to thank Dr. J for putting this together and asking me to moderate. And I want to thank all the students who've come here today. I recognize some of my students from the past and some of the panel members. And so this is pretty exciting. And I want to thank these gentlemen for their courage and generosity in sharing their insights with us. The next question in the round is, how has your education experience at Golden Gate University helped to prepare you to meet the challenges of your position? Should we just go in the same order? Sure. You want to start? Go ahead.
2 minutes.
Yeah, 2 minutes.
Take my watch off, sorry.
Yeah. Well, let me just say, my capstone project was all about using civil process to close down problem properties. And the case studies I used was back in the height of the crack epidemic. I looked at case studies from back then, and when the city had just begun using the civil process to close down crack houses, and or what was known as crack houses in some neighborhoods, and the impacts of that, and how that the criminal justice system didn't always need to exert itself to work on problems in a neighborhood. You could find other solutions to that, right? You could help, in some instances, grandmas who were being taken advantage of by their grandkids, basically, and you could do restraining orders and things like that, and really kind of free the hold that was put on that property, and really raise up that whole neighborhood's experience. You know, they're not having the late night parties and the shootings out front and things like that. And so when I went through the program, it really allowed me to sink my teeth, if you will, into that topic and learn a lot about it that has stuck with me to today. And it was really about critical thinking, really solidifying those skills to engage in critical thinking about real life problems, because we face a myriad of problems, right? Law enforcement has to deal with just about everything nowadays. And it was immense. And I recommended the program to a lot of people that took advantage of it, because I just believed in it so much, and it was a great program. It's really helped me in terms of being, I like to think of myself as a scholarly practitioner, someone who can apply good research methodologies to come up with some real practical solutions in the real life. And that's really what the path that GGU started me on. And I get calls to this day. I was telling Dr. J about it. Get calls to this day about my capstone project that was done in 2005 to this day about it. And so it's been a tremendous impact for me.
So for me, it's just the GGU's program, EMPA Executive Masters, was provided a, if you will, depth of knowledge that's needed for modern day public administrators. And it allowed me to be able to impart that knowledge and convey that to younger deputies as I was with the sheriff's office, and teach them the right way, how to lead responsibly. And so by having that foundation, and I have to give credit to the professors that taught. Most of them are experts in their field. I particularly enjoyed the administrative law segment of it. And but going back to that providing that depth of knowledge, it laid the foundation for me to become the person I am, the leader that I am. And without that education, I couldn't have retired and laid off for a year and then walked right back into an executive position at AC Transit. So thank you, faculty, for that, and I really appreciate it.
Definitely echo the thanks, because definitely this institution has brought out a lot, and I think in all the students, I can really attest to that. I feel very honored to be here. Just being here shows that the collaborative efforts that we learned, especially from the program, being able to put out the information, use the stakeholders, who are stakeholders, and they're all over. We sometimes get this tunnel vision that we are in our department and that's all. I'm in the DA's office and that's all we're going to talk to. And we forget about the community, the NGOs, all the stakeholders that could be part of solutions. We've done some wonderful things at the District Attorney's Office, definitely under the leadership of my District Attorney, George Gascon. We have started restorative justice programs dealing directly with those young kids, neighborhood courts that we established, and restore these kids. Not throwing them into the criminal court system is not always a solution. So looking outside of the box, looking collaboratively, how can we work, towards that end, that to involve other people and other, stakeholders. The other part is establishing protocols and policies, and I think that is huge. We look at Katrina 10 years ago, which is what we're calling our program here. Katrina 10 years ago, FEMA was criticized because they were criticized for failing the people in those after the hurricane. FEMA in 10 years has spent, I looked up, $131 billion in public works. And it also, in those public work projects, they were just done overnight. You had to have a lot of capital planning, a lot of people involved, a lot of stakeholders involved, and a lot of collaboration. It involved a lot of people, a lot of different levels. And working that kind of planning, looking down the future, is very important. And that's what this institution and this program has helped me to look down the road and look not just within my field, but look outside the field, because it is important. It's important for us as public administrators to do that, to look at the economics. Where can we tap in money? We have a private industry here, going back to Silicon Valley, that we could use, tapping our private sector, and tapping, of course, anybody else that we could tap, right? But it's what we do, and it's what really helps. Katrina did teach us lessons. We are, I believe, a lot more prepared today with policies and protocols in place. We've had a disaster here in San Francisco today. It's not just the police department or the district attorney's office or the fire department's problem. We have people from public works. We have people from transit. We have every department coming together under one roof. It's over on Turk Street, to be able to communicate and everyone work together. because it involves so many facets. So that was my big takeaway in 2005 when I graduated. Really looking at it a lot more in the bigger picture, not just globally, but even within our little seat that we sometimes have. It's really involving people from all levels, whether it's your rank and file or whether it's your executive staff. You need to involve people at all levels. That's what I think.
And just to touch on that a little bit more, since we're talking about Katrina, and I brought up the idea of leading responsibly, sometimes that means you have to break the rules, so to speak. So when you have people that are in need and you have all of this bureaucratic red tape, sometimes you have to the responsible thing to do is put aside that red tape and help the people that are in need. And so that's what I'm talking about when I talk about lead responsibly. It may not seem practical at the time in terms of following all the procedures that are in place, but is it the right thing to do? Is it the responsible thing to do? And that's what this education here at Golden Gate has imparted in me. So.
Thank you.
I didn't learn how to turn the mic on because obviously it was off, so I apologize.
I think your voice projected fairly well.
Okay, good, thank you.
You proclaimed it.
He works for the DA's office.
There we go. We got to the round 3, which is questions from the audience. If you want to write a question out, I understand that Kendra's going to come around and pick them up, and maybe Dr. J is going to help pick up any questions you might have written, and then we'll present them to the panel, and the panel can figure out which one of them want to answer the questions. I want to thank the gentlemen for their clarity and their telling us what we need to have, and talking about transparency, which we talk about in administrative law all the time.
Right.
This one, I think, comes from the probation department.
Okay.
Disregard that one right there.
Well, I think that, there you go. Okay. I'm going to read the question, and then I'm going to ask the panel who wants to answer the question. This is actually a multi-part question, but the first part of the question seems to me to be pretty important, because in a lot of the work that the students do in their capstones or their dissertations, they look at statistics. So the first question is, what is the importance of statistics and the outcome in today's government?
Wow. Yeah, I think, when I talk about statistics, and certainly in law enforcement, you see a dizzying amount of statistics in terms of, you name it, right? Crime rates and a whole slew of things. I think one of the things I always challenge my staff to do, and certainly in public administration, is say we have to look at things in terms of impact, right? Where I'll throw a couple of statistics out there. I run our racial profiling program at OPD that's studying the issue, that is looking at it and say, how can we come up with more fair and equitable ways to do policing in Oakland? And about 68% of the people we stop are African American. About 80% of our robbery suspects in Oakland are African American. So you would look at that and say, okay, well, maybe they are stopping the right percentage, and those numbers get thrown out all the time. But that's not really how to understand the problem, right? 92% of our homicide victims in Oakland are African American, right? So, but that doesn't mean that everyone who's African American in the city of Oakland is engaged in criminal activity. It's actually a really small percentage. It's actually a very small percentage across any community. And so looking at percentages, looking at statistics, you can get lost in that. And we say, okay, well, what's the real impact when you have 2 and 3 African American males in certain parts of our community that are going to be incarcerated at some point in their life? But that has devastating effects to that community, right? So you have to look at impacts, and you can't focus on the statistics of the numbers and things. You have to focus on impacts. You have to focus on, is the type of, in my case, policing that we're engaged in, is that having a disparate impact on any community? And that's really at the forefront of what we're doing. And we don't want to have a disparate impact on our community, and particularly communities of color in Oakland, which is why you've got to put statistics aside sometimes and just focus on impacts and say, how can we address all of those very specifically? How can we focus in on the very small percentage of people committing crime in Oakland of all races, right? And really cut through that to focus on impacts.
Did you have anything to add?
Well, I think statistics are critical for public administrators to get their job done. For me, I look at statistics on a monthly basis, whether it's assaults on bus drivers, petty theft on our coaches, and whatnot. And then there's these goals that I set, and in terms of trying to lower particular crime rates on our buses. So if one of my goals is to try to lower the crime rate by 5%, then I need to look at those stats to be able to measure that and see what the outcome is. And sometimes when you make these lofty goals and you go back and look at the outcomes, like Paul was saying, there's intended outcomes and then there are unintended outcomes. And so statistically, you need to look at that to see how are we measuring up against what we set out to do. So I think it's very important, and I think there's a need for it. And I think it allows us to look at a level of completeness, in other words, of what we're doing in terms of getting our job done, whether it be trying to lower the crime rate or getting buses out on time, cleanliness of our buses. All of that is measured statistically, so I think it's very important.
Definitely statistics are sort of a response. I mean, we look at Katrina, over 1 million people were displaced in Katrina. So do we continue to prepare for 1 million people that might be displaced again down the road? So statistics are definitely something to have, something that we need to project, capital improvements or capital responses, what have you. However, we also have to keep in mind, though, that statistics aren't always reflective of the truth. And you think of domestic violence victim, and we've all heard this statistic. You might have our uniform crime report say, oh, we've had whatever, let's just say 100 for a round number, but really, it's by the time they report it, it might have been 10 times. And I can ask everyone in the room here, how many of you have reported or had your car broken in? And did you report it to the police?
I believe I didn't, actually, the second time it happened.
So we look at statistics. Are they really reflective of what's going on? You know, and I gave you that very small example, just with, are we going to report our car being breaking in, or are you just upset about it?
Just fix the window.
You take it and you get your window fixed, you know, or is the victim of domestic violence going to report? You know, or does she finally build up the courage after the 10th time? So we need to really understand that statistics are there, but are they really reflective of what's happening? And as administrators, we really have to look at that broader picture again. Yeah.
And I just to kind of piggyback on that, I think you're absolutely right. Is it actually reflective of what's happening? And I think you're absolutely right. And we run into that all the time, where you know, especially on the crime reporting things. And even if, let's just say that there were that, you know, the homicides dropped by 85% in Oakland, right? Well, it would suck if you're one of the 35 that were killed, right? So it would be terrible, actually. So it's important to use them as measures, but to also never forget the numbers of people that are still affected by things. And I talked about the whole racial profiling thing is, you know, I gave you percentages of crimes and people that are wanted, but if you're an African American male in Oakland who's not engaged in criminal activity and you get stopped by the police, that sucks, right? That's not cool. And you're like, see, here they go again. They're not even stopping the ones engaged in criminal activity, and that ultimately hurts our relationship with trust. With the community that we need to build trust with the most in Oakland. And so that's I could probably go on forever about that, but yeah, that's
There
how
are
I
two
feel.
questions about body cameras being worn by police officers. One of them says that it's a tool, obviously, to ensure transparency and build trust. Can you speak to the impact of this particular tool on public perception?
Absolutely. I've done a couple presentations about it, actually. In 2009, we started to implement. We're the largest agency with the longest term body-worn camera program in the country. I like to say it was part of our federal consent decree that we did it, so it wasn't, Your Honor, it wasn't always by choice. But I have to tell you, we have come to embrace them in a significant way. Even the officer-involved shooting this morning, we as a society are still figuring out when is the right time to release those. And there's victim privacy advocates. And I can tell you, even from the officer-involved shooting this morning that I have seen, if you see it, you'll be affected by it, right? It is graphic. And so what is the right balance of releasing that for transparency's sake? I do think it should be released, but I just think we have a lot more thinking to do around that. And some families are, in the past have even said, don't release that because it's not that person's best hour, right? And we don't want that to be the memory that everyone has. So we still have a lot to do around that, especially if we're taking a victim statement. It can we can re-traumatize them, and who wants that on YouTube? Seattle PD right now is posting them all on YouTube. It blurs the faces and the audio, but you can kind of make out what's happening, and so they're trying to come up with software to it. But I think that they should be a requirement across the country. I think that I think it's called the civilizing effect in literature right now that's being written about it, where not only do cops act better, but the people they're interacting with act better. Because when somebody knows they're being recorded, it makes a difference. It makes a big difference. And the way our cameras work, not all cameras work this way, but once you turn it on, it's this big green dot in front of you. And people know when it's turned on, and they act better. I've seen it. I'm telling you, I've seen it. I think that's good. I think that's a great way to do policing. And so our complaints have dropped significantly across the board. The speed in which we're able to adjudicate them has dropped significantly, so we're able to get ahead of problems quicker. And it's really done some remarkable things. But I do have to say, and I agree with the privacy advocates on this point, that we have a lot of thinking to do as a society still about when we release footage involving victims and some traumatic events. But
I think it's going to become the norm, like Paul said, across the nation, because it's twofold, in my opinion. Not only does it protect the officer and can exonerate him in an internal affairs complaint, but it also can protect the citizen from the officer acting inappropriately. So I know there's a national cry for all agencies to wear body-worn cameras, and I know that my old agency, Alameda County, wears them. And I had one of the board members for the transit district ask me, "Hey, Kerry, what do you think about our folks getting body-worn cameras?" I said, "Well, they already are wearing them." So that was an eye-opener for him. But nonetheless, they're on our coaches. There are cameras everywhere. And so one of the spiels I give new operators is that whatever you do, always remain professional, because you're on camera. And not only are we going to see what the bad guys are doing, we're going to see what you're doing. So if you act inappropriately, it's going to be recorded. And we don't use that as a tool to fire people. It's just to educate folks that, hey, we want you to remain professional at all times. This is a professional organization. That's what we hired you for. And I think it brings out the best of people. I believe you guys wear V-View. Is it V-View?
Yeah.
We did a long study at Alameda County before they actually started wearing them. It was a pilot project. The vendor came in, I think it was 2 or 3 vendors, and we wore a couple of versions of it. And I think they settled on V-View, if I'm not mistaken. But I think it's going to become the way of the future. I think it's a good way to do policing because it gets at the truth of the matter. And so I think it's going to be standard as we move on going forward.
You want to add something?
I just want to add, having done investigations for a long time and unfortunately many officer-involved shootings, I agree with my distinguished colleagues here about body cameras. I think we're still not ready and don't have the protocols or policies in place to display them that quickly. And I think it would also jeopardize investigations because if you show them too soon. You know, investigation needs to go through. It needs to go through its process. You need the eyes and the witnesses and whoever sees whatever case, whether it's an officer-involved shooting or any type of investigation, an assault, robbery, what have you, or any type of confrontation, that it needs to be investigated. You need to get everybody's safe first before coming to a conclusion. Does that help? Does that corroborate? Absolutely. But it all depends on when the camera's turned on, what happened before, what was said before, you know, at what point is the camera damaged or the view of the camera, especially if there's a rumble or a fight, you know, are you really able to see everything? So it's a tool. It's undoubted. Definitely it's going to be it's a great tool. You know, especially investigations that we done when we didn't have body camera, we have cameras all over the place. Right. You know, they definitely add to the different angles, and it comes to finding the truth. Definitely, and that's the bottom line, is finding the truth. But you can't let the body camera be the one-all and the one-all answer, you know, and putting it out in the media, and of course back to social media, it'll be all out, and then you're going to have people making conclusions, or it's going to fog that one witness that did see something and didn't come forward, you know, and could be your vital witness that might have heard something happen before, might have saw something at a different angle, and that would be my only.
Yeah, but I think we have to be cognizant of the fact that even if the police aren't wearing the body cameras, everyone else is.
Yes.
How many of you have a cell phone here tonight? So if something goes down, chances are it's going to be recorded. So we need to just keep that in mind.
And I'll finish with this on the body-worn camera stuff. We definitely have to keep in mind that body-worn cameras, depending on the lens, and some of them even have night vision now, they pick up way more than our eyes do. So we may watch a video and go, oh, I see that plain as day. But if Tim is over here a threat to me, like he has been in the past, I'm looking at Tim, and you know, the person next to you might be doing something. I'm not. I've got so much tunnel vision on you. Everyone's watching the video and saying, well, that person should have saw that. Well, no, that's not the case. That's not how our bodies work physiologically. And so that is also something that there has to be a lot of community education about. Otherwise, it could really put agencies in a bad spot, because it makes, well, I can't believe they didn't see that. Well, that's physiologically not how we work.
Right, we all heard of the tunnel vision effect, right? You know?
There's another question here about, it says, the question is, how do you feel about bad press being directed at law enforcement, i.e. Ferguson? But I think it's a more general question. And I think it's been touched on a little bit, our friend from FEMA, that the press doesn't always get it right. And so how do you deal with that, and how do you feel about dealing with that? You want to start?
Well, you know, it's going back to, you know, what kind of press, what kind of image has your department created? And so if you have a positive image within your community or within your organization or within the state, bad press may or may not hit you. And again, it goes back to what type of relationships. Our friend from FEMA here totally hit that right on the head. You know, what is the relationship that you have with that governor or with your mayor or your state or the federal level? Image back, you know, like Oakland, you know, what is, you know, you get bad press, or you look back at Baltimore, you know, there was a lot of finger pointing. The chief of police was finger pointing. But what was the relationship between that department and their community? I think it was zero. It was zero. You know, so there was definitely no trust involved. Their image basically was non-existent. So bad press like that is definitely going to have an effect on a department or any kind of institution. You know, so really it comes back to building that relationships, building the trust, you know, transparency, of course, as we mentioned, you know, many times, and having that press hopefully roll right off you, because you're always going to have bad press, you know, but you want the people to trust you that you're doing the right thing, and you're doing the good thing, and you're going out there doing what is just.
And a lot of it's developed with the PIO and the press. Those are relationships that are built over time, and so they are most likely, usually, you're the foot forward for an agency. So having that relationship between the public information officer and the press, and that bond, if you will, sort of softens the blow. And if, in fact, there is bad press, you always have the chance to come back and tell your side of it if you have that relationship built prior to you receiving the bad press. So I think it's a two-way street. I think you're going to get it. It's inevitable. But you also have the opportunity to build new relationships. If they get it wrong, then you can go back and say, hey, give us time to tell you what really happened. So.
Where do I start? Oakland has pretty much my whole life been treated as a doormat, I should say, by the media for years. And I've had conversations with news directors over the years. I did our public information for a couple years, and one of them, probably the most insightful comment, and it was unfortunate, but it was insightful. And ever since then, I've been like, okay, I get it. A news director said, I wouldn't say it was Channel 2, but but a news director said, and he goes, here's what you got to come to grips with, that we expect government and public administrators to do their job right. Like, we expect you to do that. That's what you need to do. But it's when you do your job wrong, or it's perceived by others that are wrong, that's newsworthy. So Oakland for years, and our political environment has been very tumultuous, to say the least. If you look at different events over the years, the police department certainly has had a history of some negative things occurring, and particularly in my career in the late '90s with the Writers case, the Writers scandal, for some of you that remember those years. But it really comes down to that, and for whatever reason, and it drives me nuts that Oakland just tends to get just beaten up by the media. During the high homicide years, during the height of the drug war, when we arrested in 1996 33,000 people in Oakland, it didn't lower homicides. It was, in fact, one of our highest homicide years, and that's true throughout the 90s. But it was like almost a count, like a homicide count every night on the media. I mean, they wanted to talk about the violence in Oakland, and it really fed this negative energy about Oakland in the media, and it's really been hard to turn around that image.
Right, but
really hard to turn around that image.
At the same token, when you're getting that bad press, if you have a seasoned PIO that knows how to switch the message and get your message out to the community, what you want them to know, and then that's a great opportunity to build that bond with the community. So I took a PIO class many years ago, and the instructor, I believe she was a news anchor from, I forget what station it was, but she kept saying, bring your message back to what you want to say. Even though the press is bad at the time, own up to it. If you did something that was not right, own up to it, but then bring that message back, what you're doing to fix it, and you'll be respected a lot more for that.
There's another question. It's a little broad, but I think it is something that we were trying to get to when we were talking about what the public challenges, facing public administration today, and how ready are you to meet those challenges if we did have a crisis in the Bay Area concerning something like the Boston bombing, or something that brought those issues to the fore. Are we in a position to prevent some of these catastrophes, and what are we doing to prevent them?
I can just say in Oakland we have prevented them. There was an event 2 years ago where some individuals tried to load up a truck full of explosives. Fortunately, the FBI was able to intervene and make sure that the device didn't work, and stop it from happening. And it was going to be on Hagenberger Road in Oakland, of all places, right? I mean, Hagenberger near the Coliseum. I mean, And it kind of caught folks off guard, but they were ready for it and they intervened. And the effort was going, and it was widely reported in newspapers, so I'm not saying anything that's not out there. But so in that case, there was good proactive, understanding of what threats were out there, and they were able to intervene in one. But this is the kind of stuff I lose sleep over as a public official. I lose sleep over this. What are we missing? Where are the holes at? Especially with these lone wolf actors, where they're just going to do it on their own and they're not coordinating with anybody. It is really hard to get ahead of that. And unfortunately, we will likely have an event here in the Bay Area. I can absolutely tell you, pre 9/11, the networking was not as strong as the networking is now. Now we're in joint regional task forces together, and we can marshal up a lot of resources. We have pre-staged resources as well, and we can do a lot more. And one of the things that FEMA's been great about is they give us funding for command posts, and we do joint training sessions together, regional exercises. So we're a little bit better off, but I live in Oakland, and my house is 2 blocks away from the Hayward Fault. And how prepared we are is just a matter of how much that thing wants to slip. And if it slips big enough, there's nothing me or FEMA is going to do to stop that from happening. But the key is, are we as prepared as we can? I think so. I got my house bolted and all that.
It's
but
a response.
It's a response. Yeah. And I think we're a lot better off than we were pre 9/11. It's made us think. It's made us think about a lot. And certainly we went through the Hills Fire in Oakland, which we learned a lot about. The fire departments had different size hoses. That's part of the reason the hills burned as long as they did in Oakland, and that's all been fixed. And FEMA actually had a big part in making all that happen. So I do think we're in a better place.
I would agree with that. There's a little exercise that Sheriff Ahern, Sheriff of Alameda County, puts on annually. It's called Urban Shield, and it's an emergency preparedness exercises, and it's 72 hours continuous, and it brings all of the different disciplines, EMS, fire, police, together to train for those type of incidents that could befall us. And I think because that they're doing that, it gives law enforcement an idea of how to respond and what to expect in those type of. I mean, you can't really recreate a catastrophic event, but you can certainly train for it, and people usually react to their training. So it's muscle memory, and the more you do that, the more you can bring the different disciplines together to train. I think we're better prepared for it than we would have been years ago. So,
Jim?
Yeah, and going not only on the local level, again, going back to collaboration, it is, with the Joint Terrorism Task Force, which is FBI is the lead on, we have Economic Crimes Task Force. You think just people on the ground and eyes, but we also have Electronic Crime Task Force, so we're trying to keep eyes on everything electronically as well. And that involves federal, state, and local level. These are all. NITRIC is another organization that supplies information to everyone in this Northern Bay Area. And it has different regions throughout the entire United States. Anything that's suspicious that gets reported, we're all seeing it. And all of us in law enforcement, public administration, or public safety agencies, we're all looking at information and we're sharing that information. It's not just, oh, gee, I saw somebody taking pictures at the airport and it looked kind of suspicious. Now I know about it, Fremont PD knows about it, and DEA knows about it, Joint Terrorism Task Force. Everyone is on the same page, and that has become huge because we can't all be the eyes and ears. We need everybody to be the eyes and ears and people reporting it, and that's the kind of information that now is getting disseminated, and that comes back to how we're using everybody in networking and collaboration and all the stakeholders.
Right, I've been asked to end the portion of the panel. I want to thank the panel so much for their candor and their answers to these questions, and I want to thank the audience for being here. It's not very much fun to have these things without somebody coming to do it, and I think, Jay, you want the floor again?
Yeah, one more round of applause for our panelists. Our moderator. It's hard to moderate these gentlemen, We need a judge to do it. Right, from Oakland. So once again, let's give a big round of applause. Happy birthday, 50 years and 25 years to Pi Alpha Alpha.